Right, so here we are. I wanted to talk about a question that gets posed to me on a somewhat regular basis. Um, Being that I'm a polytheist, I guess you could say, or spiritual mutt is another way of putting it that I like to say. Basically, I'm just free to enjoy and learn from all the religions and all the faiths of the world and all philosophies and all spiritual endeavors or whatever you want to call it. I love myths. I love legends. I love learning and hearing stories and how people used to live hundreds or thousands of years ago. I think there's a lot in that to teach us of how far we've come as a species, some of the challenges that we met along the way, and how we've been able to overcome those challenges. I think it speaks to a lot about the human spirit and our actual nature and how we did come from hunter gatherers who were transient in nature and never really staying in one place. So this hunkering down, first of all, and staying in one place for a long period of time is relatively new to the human species. So that is where you encounter all sorts of challenges with our physical decline. Sitting in front of the desk, I know this very well firsthand. Sitting in front of the desk all day long, it breaks your body. After doing it for several years, your back is affected, your shoulders get affected, your arms, your elbows, your neck. I've got a permanent kink in my neck now, where it started off as, you wake up, oh, I slept funny, my neck's a little stiff. That happened enough times that now I have this permanent kink in my neck. My C3 and 4, I believe, those discs are permanently screwed up. So it becomes a matter of adapting and rolling with it. Obviously, my physiology is not going to change. There's not enough time in a few decades of my life to trigger any sort of evolutionary changes that will benefit me or even future generations, maybe 1,000 years from now, who knows? Anyway, I'm getting on a bit off on a bit of a tangent here, but it all kind of connects in that, well, why does God let bad things happen? Let me just get it out there and put it on the table. That's the question, right? Maybe not something as insignificant or minor as, okay, I've got some back pain because I'm sitting at the desk all day long. I'm trying to connect these things now and segue into what the topic of this conversation is supposed to be, but you get where I'm going with this. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why does God let such atrocities happen in the world? Why do children who are innocent suffer needlessly? And why does God allow all this to happen? I think that we need to look at it from a different perspective. First of all, what God are we talking about here? Are we talking about the Abrahamic God, the one God? Are we talking about one of a series of gods? Are we talking about someone's personal God? Are we talking about a religious God? I would argue that there is a God, right? An overarching sort of patriarchal God. That's a possibility. Um, there may be a family of gods that sort of work together, as almost a relative, like in the Celtic myths. Um, their gods were not their superiors necessarily; they were family members. They were treated as equals, and they were not above the people. Now, there's a problem with the way that that's explained, or the way that the problem is presented. There's an issue there because, okay, let's look at it from this perspective. God is all powerful, all knowing, omnipresent, um, in control of all that happens within the universe. That's one way of looking at it, right? God is the micromanager in all things. There's another way of looking at it, which is God being a greater organism than us who represent the individual parts. So, for example, my body, myself, I would consider one organism, even though I have many different systems within me. I'm made up of countless billions and trillions of cells, neurons and nerves and firings of different things and receptors and so on. Now, you could think of it from the perspective of a single cell. Let's say one single cell in the pinky of my left hand decides, why does this organism allow us to die? Why does this organism allow myself and my fellow cells to get sick and die and suffer? Well, it's not that I don't care about this little cell. I don't have an intimate knowledge or relationship with it because it's so small and it's such a tiny part of the overall organism that makes me who I am. So if you think of it as one human, right, one cell, questioning the overall organism, there's a huge disconnect there. Okay. And again, it's not that I, as the greater organism, don't love every single cell in my body. I do, and I want to protect it and I want to take care of it. But it's this single cell is part of a greater organism. And each individual cell is in a very intimate relationship with all the other cells around it, to the point where there's a dependency there. This cell only knows itself in its relationship with all the other cells around it. And that's how people are. One individual life, yes, can make a difference, but there's a much more potent opportunity there to make a bigger difference as a cluster of individuals. You know, for example, the cluster of cells that make up my pinky finger, now they can all work together with bone cells and nerves and blood to become a finger. And now the cells can do things together that they would never be able to do as a single cell. So hopefully you see kind of where I'm going with this. As individuals, we're not as potent as we are in a group. And that's where, unfortunately, the powers that wish to be are trying to convince us that it's all about the collective, right? But we know that collectives are made up of individuals. So you can't say the individual is more important than the collective or the collective is more important than the individual. There's no more important. It's all the same thing. It's all together. Just like myself as an individual, as a human, I am not only a part of the world is a part of me, right? At what point does the bee become the flower or the flower become the bee? It's really one thing happening at once together. You know, the bee cannot live without the flower cannot live without the bee. They're more than just a symbiotic organism at this point. They're really different aspects of the same thing. And this takes us into some of my own personal philosophies on Taoism and how there are two sides to everything. And it's that relationship, again, that intimate relationship that makes the wholeness of the organism. Now, that's one way of looking at it, right? God is the greater organism. We're just one small part of that organism. So, and it's not that God has no ability to communicate with us. It's just that that communication maybe is limited in the same way that I'm limited to talking to one individual cell here. How I take care of that individual cell in my body is by taking care of the whole. And that's probably in a lot of ways the way that God operates, is by taking care of the individual human. God needs to take care of the whole organism, needs to take care of himself. And in doing that, we'll take care of his children, his components. Okay? So that's one way of looking at it. So it's not that God is powerless or that God is not omnipotent. It's that you can't micromanage things down to the microscopic level. It's just not efficient that way. If God would control each individual human and ensure that no tragedies happen in the world, no suffering ever occurs, well, humans would cease to exist because all that would be left is God. And there would be no experience of God. God sort of experiences himself through his people, right? So without, if God was sort of treating humans as a marionette, well, then humans don't have free will. They're just God controlling things, right? Moving things around. And we would all be just different aspects of God materialized in a physical form. You know, it starts to break down at that point. It starts to fall apart, and that's obviously not where the answer is. But looking at it from another perspective, and this is where this is a more favorable outlook as far as I'm concerned. Going back to free will. Now, looking at it from the perspective of God the parent or God the creator, okay? As a dad, I know that I can't micromanage my kids, right? I can't, as much as I love them and I care about them, I cannot over shelter them or they will not learn from their own mistakes. And that's the point. That's the point I want to make here. And I think that's where the truth lies, is that people need to make mistakes. There has to be some tragedy in the world to create a better environment, to keep pushing forward for something better, right? If there was no tragedy, if there was no suffering in the world, there would be no corresponding component, right, in relativity that would offer us joy and satisfaction. You can't have joy without sadness. You can't have elation without depression. There has to be a reference there. There has to be another perspective to show you where you are, right? If you're traveling in space and there are no landmarks around, you have no way of knowing that you're even moving. The movement only happens in relationship to something else that's coming towards you or going away from you, or that's when you know that you're moving. It's Einstein, right? It's relativity. So it's not that God allows these things to happen. It's that these things innately need to happen. And God is so powerful and so intelligent that he knows that he needs to let go. He cannot interfere with all the dealings of humans, because then he becomes the human, and he's not a human. He's not at the human level. He's way beyond that, right? As myself, as the greater organism, is not concerned with the dealings of one individual cell. I let the cell do what it needs to do. If that cell gets sick and it dies, I loved that cell. I tried my best to take care of it, but it did something, or something happened to it and it ended up dying. It suffered. It's gone now. right? But it also made room for new life to grow. So, Christians love to bring this one up is you don't know the greater plan of what God has in mind, or there's a greater plan here. We just don't understand it. I don't think that's the case. I don't think it's a matter of God has this big, amazing plan that encompasses human suffering. I don't think that's what it is. I think it's more of a hands off approach. God loves us to the point where he trusts us to make our own decisions, and he knows that we're going to make mistakes. But just like I let my kids make their own mistakes and learn from them, God allows us to make our own mistakes and learn from them. And every time we make mistakes and learn from them, we get closer to God. So it is a perfect system. It's already worked out. It's not something that humans need to necessarily analyze and figure out what's wrong here. There's nothing wrong. It's working exactly the way that it's supposed to. Now, where it becomes challenging for us and difficult is dealing with the suffering. It's never going to be easy. And I think it needs to be that way because that's what pushes us to want more and to go beyond. And it's really our job to eliminate that suffering and to reduce the atrocities in the world. That's not God's job. God gave us life, God gave us free will to make the world a better place because it's not his job. It's our job, you know. We have a little bit of God in all of us. And so it's like asking the CEO of a company to come do frontline sales. It just doesn't make any sense. Why would the CEO of a company who's worked so hard to move all the way up to that company, or who's potentially started that company from scratch, why would they want to lower themselves to a basic rudimentary role when they could just trust their employees to do that level of the operational necessity themselves? If you can't trust your kids, if you can't trust your employees, if you can't trust your own creations, what does that say about you? What does that say about the environment that you've created for them? What does it say about your potency, right? So I think in just the fact that there is suffering in the world and there is these atrocities is proof that God loves us, because he's given us enough free will that he can step back and say, go ahead, kids, make your mistakes. I'll be here for you. I'll be here to love you. I'll be here to take care of you, but I'm not going to shelter you because it's a harsh world. And the people, just like my kids, they need to learn that for themselves. They need to learn that it's a harsh world and that nature doesn't necessarily care about their feelings, that there's a greater system out there operating beyond themselves that they need to find a place to exist within. So I know that's a lot, but to me, those are the two theories that I've come up with for why God allows suffering to occur in the world. And again, it's not an allowance thing. It's not a let's see what happens when we let people crash and burn. It's not that. It's that you can't have uh, a species that operates under free will without also making some mistakes. And I would say that the suffering, the atrocities in the world are not the result of God, right? If we believe in God as a perfect being, there is no mistake there. This is exactly what's happening now is what needs to happen. It's just, as humans, we don't always understand why. Why do people need to suffer? Why? And again, I don't want to go backwards here and say, oh, it's God's divine will. Maybe, but I think it's that he loves us so much that he will let us make those mistakes ourselves, because he knows that by making those mistakes, we'll learn from them and we'll know how to better this world with that divine spark of God within ourselves to make the world a better place. And that's the epitome of human endeavor. That's how we got to where we are now, is with that free will. So there's a give and take there. You can't have the innovation without the sacrifice. You can't have a peaceful, happy world without some suffering to get there. And that's the unfortunate part, but that's also the fortunate part. That's also what makes us human. So, and this all becomes more obvious when you look at things from the lens of natural law, right, versus man-made bullshit legislation and acts of parliament, which are meaningless fiction. But when you look at universal law, higher law, this all makes sense, and it all complements each other perfectly. So that's my theory on how these things come to be in the world. And don't get me wrong, I'm trying to do what I can to better the world, but a lot of that is taking care of yourself. And as a parent, I've come to know that quite intimately myself firsthand. Is you want to be a good parent, learn how to be a good person. Learn how to be a good you. And then naturally you'll be a good parent. Naturally your kids will gravitate towards you and want to learn from you and do what you're doing, because they see how happy you are and how effective you are in your role, and they're going to want to emulate that. That's what kids do. Monkey see, monkey do, right? So that's my long-winded explanation. I hope it was beneficial for you. I don't know where this video is going to live, in a philosophy corner somewhere. I'll find a spot for it, and we'll hopefully get a dialogue going and a nice conversation on this. I'd love to hear other perspectives on this topic. So I'm going to end it there. If you have any questions, comments, please let me know. And I hope you're well. Take care. See you next time.